And as far as your point about like, that there was never a currency or there was never an official state of Palestine, as I've said before, I just find this to be the most un-American, un-enlightenment way of looking at things. I mean, all you have to do is read the...
It's just comparing facts.
It's not. No, it is completely irrelevant, and here's why it's irrelevant. And the idea that people say, well, if Hamas just surrendered today, the war would be over. Like, let's even say that's true, which I'm not convinced it is, but let's say that's true. And then what? Live in subjugation forever?
If you actually want equality and fairness, then let's address the facts. Palestinians live better lives often in Israel than in Palestine itself. It's not a ridiculous point.
There is
how
an
many
imbalance
rockets a
of
day does
power
Hamas
that
send
changes
into
how many...
Israel?
When Emily tries to downplay Israel's brutal occupation with the tired, they live better under occupation line, Dave Smith is not just going to push back. He's going to bulldoze through decades of sanitized propaganda. He doesn't need talking points. He drops truth bombs straight from the ground up. Gaza's under siege. The West Bank is being carved out piece by piece, and Palestinians are being erased home by home, drop by drop. And while Emily fumbled with her hostage math and imaginary equality, Dave brought receipts. This isn't a war, it's apartheid with the PR team. Stick with me here because he's even gonna make it painfully clear. Saying Palestine never had a currency or prime minister is like saying Native Americans had no right to their land. It's settler colonialism. Stop dressing it up. And when Piers, out of all people, admits Israel controls Gaza's water, food, electricity, you know the mask is slipping. This isn't just a debate. It's gonna be Dave Smith dragging the illusion of balance into the light and setting fire to it. Let's roll.
Just last point, Piers, that is really important.
Yeah.
If we're serious about wanting to end these atrocities, you have to deal with the underlying problem. And the underlying problem is that Israel's recipe for Palestinians says they are not allowed to ever be free. They must live under siege and occupation forever. And if they don't like it, they can either leave or be subject to Israel's brutal military operations. And until Israel starts seeing Palestinians as equal human beings who can live in freedom on their own land, I don't think this thing is going to end. We're going to be stuck
I'll
in this
come to
cycle for a
David
very
in a
long
moment,
time.
just to get a quick reaction to that from Emily.
I actually agree with Omar to a certain extent that if you go back and forth and compare atrocities, it'll be an endless conversation because there's plenty to go back and forth with. I'd also like to add, talking about if you flip the narrative, let's say, which thank God Israel has the Iron Dome, let's say they hadn't, how many civilian casualties on a daily basis would Israel be facing? I also want to point out some serious hypocrisy. Everyone's talking about why can't we equivocate Palestinian lives to Israeli lives? And absolutely we should. Why are Palestinian lives any less or more valuable than an Israeli? Then how come in every ceasefire exchange, for some reason they equivocate one hostage to 6,000 Palestinians who are arrested for either alleged terrorism or valid terrorism? If you actually want equality and fairness, then let's address the facts. Palestinians live better lives often in Israel than in Palestine itself. It's not a ridiculous point.
There is
how
an
many
imbalance
rockets a
of
day does
power
Hamas
that
send
changes
into
how many...
Israel? Sorry, there's
I'm sorry.
lag.
That's a complete complete misreading of the situation. The reason why there is a discrepancy in the hostage exchanges is because there is a huge disparity in power. Israel can just go into the Palestinian areas and kidnap thousands upon thousands of Palestinians who are held without charge or trial. If Hamas were capable of doing something like that, you probably would see a one-to-one exchange
to target
of people.
civilians?
But the point is, the underlying fact that you can't get away from here is that this is an asymmetrical conflict. Israel has occupied Palestine since 1967. We're not talking about a few months after a war or even a few years after a war. We're talking about longer than the Soviet Union occupied Eastern Europe. And the idea that people say, well, if Hamas just surrendered today, the war would be over. Like, let's even say that's true, which I'm not convinced it is, but let's say that's true. And then what? Live in subjugation forever? I mean, look, the height of the Netanyahu doctrine was 2 weeks before October 7th, when he went to the United Nations with a map of greater Israel, including Gaza and the West Bank all being Israel. That was the peak of the Netanyahu doctrine. And what he was telling the world and the Palestinians was, it's over, you lost, we won, we made our deals with the outside Arab world, no one's coming to save you. You live in subjugation forever. And the culmination of that was October 7th.
Okay.
And that's not to remove responsibility from Hamas.
Yeah,
but you cannot remove responsibility from Israel either.
I'll let Emily respond to that.
I want to ask David, you just said Israel is occupied. Obviously, you hear that narrative every day. And I often hear chants, specifically here in Manhattan, we don't want 2 states, we want all of 48. when the UN came up with the partition plan and nobody was happy with that, and they gave land not only to Israel but Jordan too, I can't help but to think, why does nobody criticize the occupation of Jordanians taking the land from the Palestinians? How come it's only anger once it's the only Jewish state in the entire world, in the entire globe, that suddenly it's occupation? And also, can somebody enlighten me how we occupied the land that never had a prime minister, never had a government, never had a currency, never had one person with historical ties to the land called Palestine?
Sure.
I just can't wrap my head around this occupation narrative.
Well,
that doesn't exist.
let me see if I can help. So the reason why people aren't currently occupied about or currently outraged about Egypt occupying Gaza or Jordan occupying the West Bank or something like that is because it's been over since 1967. So, like, yeah, if you want to go back historically, there were bad things that were done by lots of groups of people. However, since then, it's been the Israelis doing the occupation. That's not a narrative. That's just a description of reality. And as far as your point about, like, you know, that there was never a currency or there was never an official state of Palestine, as I've said before, I just find this to be the most un-American, un-enlightenment way of looking at things. I mean, all you have to do is read the
just comparing
well, no,
facts.
it's not. No, it is completely irrelevant. And here's why it's irrelevant. Read the Declaration of Independence. That's all you need to do, and it will completely dispel you of that. The Declaration of Independence starts off right away.
Well, the Middle East is not America.
Hold on, let me just say this. Let me just.
Frankly,
No, okay, fine, it's not, but these values transcend America. It's the idea of natural rights. Man is born free because these are God-given rights, and governments are just something we institute to protect our rights. And if the government isn't doing a good job of that, then the people have the right and maybe even the duty to overthrow that government. No offense, Pierce, you guys, you've had your wins too, but this one was ours. And so I'm just saying, no, listen, it doesn't matter whether they were dominated by the Ottomans or the British Empire or Jordan or Egypt before then. These are human beings who deserve natural rights, and they have absolutely no rights under Israeli rule and haven't since 1967 due to the Israelis.
Okay.
What happened before
The
that is
Palestinians
irrelevant.
actually have full rights in
All right,
Israel, but okay.
Well, I tell you what,
Yes,
Emily,
but I'm
on
talking
that
about the
point.
Palestinians in Palestine.
Well, hang on. Here's what I would say about that. It was very clear very soon after October the 7th when Israel was able to control food, energy, water, and things like that, and turn that tap of supply on and off, that actually Palestinians do not have the same free rights as Israelis. Otherwise, Israel wouldn't have had the ability to do that. Now,
But
Israel,
how much of the percentage of that, the water
well,
and
Israel would put up an argument about why they do that, but you can't dispute that was what they were able to do.
Certainly do, Piers. I want to address this directly, but I just have to go back to just one thing that Emily had said, because I think it's really, really important not to gloss over it. When we talk about Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories, when you look at settler colonialism in the United States and the fact that Native Americans were pushed off of their land, nobody cares that Native Americans did not have an officially recognized government or what currency they had or this or that. These are people who are living on their land who are being pushed out by an occupying force, and that's all that matters. And what's unique about the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories, particularly in the West Bank today, is the fact that it's settler colonial expansion. Palestinians are being systematically pushed out of their land and out of their homes, so Israel can build more and more settlements to take over Palestinian areas. And 80% of water in the West Bank is taken to be used by Israel and by the settlers. This is Palestinian water. Every Israeli policy, every inch of the West Bank that Israel takes over by force, every drop of water that Israel takes is a violation of international law. These are war crimes that Israel is committing. So to pretend to conflate all of that with whatever historical examples there have been of other occupations and not, you're missing the point that Israel is actively replacing Palestinians with Israelis
but let's also,
as an effort to confine
all right, but let's also get to the point
areas.
of this breaking news.
I also want to address that America did not give the land back.
Okay,
so
but I want to move. Listen, I want to.
Let's move on.
Okay, but I want to talk about Listen, you've all had a good chance to talk. I want to talk about specifically this proposal and whether you think this is the kind of framework we need now to get to peace, and whether you believe that anyone affiliated to Hamas can have any role in any kind of government in Gaza going forward.
Sure. Starting with the ceasefire, I think it's quite obvious and inevitable that a ceasefire is going to be the only way out of the mess that we're currently in, unless people are happy to just sit back and watch a genocide unfold for year after year. And the only problem right now with a ceasefire is whether there is a question about whether we're going to move from a temporary one to a permanent one, and what that negotiation in between entails. And the problem is that Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it absolutely clear that there will not be a permanent ceasefire until Hamas is completely defeated. So he's insisting effectively that there's not going to be a ceasefire because he can't defeat Hamas militarily, and so the slaughter is going to continue indefinitely. So to the extent that the international community and the United States can apply meaningful pressure on Israel, and Netanyahu in particular, to say knock off this delusional fantasy that you're going to have an epic win beyond the fact that you've completely destroyed the Gaza Strip and killed 40,000 people, enough is enough. It's time to put an end to this onslaught and just have an exchange of prisoners as hostages and move on with life. As for the question about Hamas, whether Hamas can have a role in the future or whether Netanyahu can, I don't think that's a particularly important question. I think Israelis can sort out who leads them. People in Gaza can figure that out. What's important for us as a third party sitting on the outside, be it the United States or the rest of the international community, is to say that support for foreign military occupation should not continue. It is not our role to decide who rules Palestinians or who rules Israelis or who's in the government and who's not. It is our role to say that as long as Israel continues occupying Palestinian land, besieging Palestinians, denying them their most basic and fundamental rights, Israel should not receive another penny of U.S. from the United States in military funding, and not another veto and all this unconditional diplomatic support that the U.S. provides for Israel to do whatever it wants, violate international law left and right without any consequence.
Conversely, what about all the money that Hamas has been receiving, billions of dollars, a lot of it via Israel, presumably by the same yardstick, you would like to see zero funding going into Hamas?
Unquestionably. Unquestionably, human rights organizations have been absolutely clear about the fact that nobody should be sending weapons either to Hamas or to Israel, and I agree with that entirely. Fortunately, I live in a country that does not supply Hamas, so it's very easy for me to say stop U.S. funding for Hamas because it doesn't exist in the first place. What does exist is U.S. funding for the Israeli government and the monstrous atrocities that they are committing day in and day out, and that's what we need to have change. And once that changes, once Israel no longer enjoys this impunity that the U.S. gives them, they will find themselves in a position where they have to negotiate in good faith and to recognize that Palestinians are an equal human being who have to get their fundamental rights, that they are entitled to every inch of independence and dignity and basic human rights that Israelis enjoy. Until Israel treats Palestinians differently, we're not going to have an end to this conflict, and that's what needs to change.
Let's call it what it is. Dave Smith and Omar didn't just win this debate, they dismantled the entire facade. While Emily spun herself in circles defending war crimes with moral gymnastics, Dave and Omar tag teamed the truth like seasoned heavyweights. Dave exposed the absurdity of denying occupation by ripping into the no Palestinians ever existed myth, using American values no less, and Omar drilled down the Israel's apartheid doctrine with a clarity that left no room for spin. Together, they exposed the asymmetry of dehumanization and the brutal status quo. This wasn't just a debate, it was a reality check. Even though that this was broadcasted a year ago, their propaganda, their mindset, and their agenda remains the same almost 2 years into this. Now it's your turn. Drop a comment down below. Who do you think walked away with the mic? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And stay loud. The truth doesn't censor itself.